So, good evening, everyone, and it's such a pleasure to see all of you here today. We've got an incredible conversation ahead with three extraordinary individuals whose work has shaped how we think about business, leadership, and the world around us. Now, I'm not going to get into much details out here about our speakers because, as registered participants, you've already received detailed notes via email beautifully crafted by my brilliant colleague N.S. Ramnath, who's also managing the backend today. But let me quickly introduce our speakers with our highlights. First up, there's Professor John Kay. Now, I must tell you that he's having some trouble with connectivity. He will join us. He's been joining in and dropping out, but he will join us in a few minutes. So, Professor John is one of UK's most respected economists. His ideas have influenced policymakers, business leaders, and curious readers like us. In his latest book, The Corporation in the 21st Century, is a bold exploration of how the relentless pursuit of shareholder value has reshaped companies, often not for the better. It's a fascinating read and already a standout of 2024. Now, next up, we have Ramesh Srinivasan. Ramesh started his journey with McKinsey in India and is now a senior partner in New York, specializing in healthcare and leadership. His work doesn't just help organizations run better, it transforms how leaders think and act. Beyond consulting, he is deeply committed to education and social impact and serving on boards like Akanksha and Teach for India. Ramesh, we are delighted you could join us.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, there's our curator, Shivakumar, or Shiv as he's known to many of us. Shiv has had a remarkable 40-year career from steering companies to writing bestsellers like The Right Choice and The Art of Management. He's currently an operating partner at Advent International, and his ability to distill complexity into clarity is truly unmatched. Shiv, it's a privilege to have you lead this session.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles, for those kind words.
And before I hand things over to you, Shiv, a quick note to everyone logged in. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We'll bring them to our speakers as we go along. Now, but for Shiv, before going there, we've had some questions coming specifically for you, and I've picked the top three. I bunched them together. Let me run them by you, and if I may gently suggest, can you keep your answers tight because we've got a lot of room to cover. So the first two questions, I'm just going to throw them both at you together, is how do you read so much? Is there a process that you follow? And the second one is, why do you write summaries and how has it helped you as a leader?
Good one. So I use as much of my dead time as possible. I'm on flights a lot of the time. So I read a lot on the flights. That's one. And when I read, and I've had this habit right from school, I underline or mark it. And then at the end of the day, I summarize it or reread it. I started summarizing books when I became a CEO, and then I started circulating it to everybody in my company. And that's how the habit happened. And once I was on LinkedIn, I started doing it on LinkedIn. So that's how it happens.
Shiv, you didn't speak much about how do you read so much. Is there a process that you follow?
I think the only way for a leader to stay relevant is one is to read and equip himself with the latest concepts. Two is to talk to people outside his or her industry, at least two people every month. That's the only way you can stay relevant. Otherwise, in today's world, you'll become archaic and irrelevant.
And a follow-up to that, Shiv, is that I remember you had mentioned to me once, and I thought that was backbreaking, that you complete a book in about 2 to 3 sittings.
Settings max.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you drop a book in the middle, you'll never go back to it. So my own experience is you must finish a book within 2 sittings, max 3 sittings. Like William Dalrymple's book is a really thick book. Okay. And so it'll take 3 sittings minimum. But most other books, 250-page books, you should finish in 2 sittings. Otherwise, you'll never go back to it.
Right. Right. And finally, there was one question that came across, which was very, very interesting. Your thoughts on AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity. Has it made writing and learning easier?
Oh, so I think you get a lot of prompts. Like I got a lot of prompt on LinkedIn, I get a lot of prompts on WhatsApp, etc., to say, hey, maybe you want to try this. So if you're open, you look at it. If you believe it's a good one, you use it. If it's not a good one, you don't use it. But one thing is happening. Employees today are using AI on themselves before they actually go to work and use AI at work. And I think that's a very good thing because they have a first-hand knowledge. No other technology has this happened. We didn't learn Excel on our own before we went to a company Excel sheet. But for the first time, we are learning about AI on our data sets and then moving to a company data set. That's what I see as fascinating and interesting.
So thank you, Shiv, for those fascinating insights. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hand it over to you. The ball's in your court, and I know that you will lead us into what will be a brilliant conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Charles, for those kind words and those few questions. So let's start, ladies and gentlemen, as Professor K joined in.
Not yet, Shiv.
Not
He's
yet.
struggling,
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
Then I'm absolutely delighted to be in conversation with Ramesh from McKinsey and Professor John K, an absolute legend in his own right. Ramesh will be a legend in his own right by the time he finishes his McKinsey career. So my first question to you, Ramesh, is could you help describe for us the McKinsey Bovo Forum from which a lot of material has been gleaned for your wonderful book, how it operates, and how does learning happen amongst those 5-6 CEOs without being judged?
Thank you, Shiv. Firstly, what a lovely idea to both nominate books and create the lists that you do, as well as having such live conversations and engaging with set of some amazing people. I know some of the people who have joined, and I've heard of some of the other people who have joined. So really terrific work that you all are doing. So congratulations on that. The Bauer Forum as an idea, the Bauer Forum is named after Marvin Bauer, even though James O. McKinsey founded McKinsey almost 100 years ago. It was really Marvin who led McKinsey for many, many decades and helped build a great institution. And one of Marvin's famous quotes was that you really learn to be a CEO when you take on the role. And the role of a CEO or even a leader as you get more tenured becomes quite lonely. I know we're going to explore this concept of truth telling later in this conversation, but people actually don't come and give you feedback or speak the truth to you. You don't have opportunities where you can actually hold a mirror to a leader. So that's what led to the idea of the Bauer Forum almost 12 years ago. We have had more than 600 CEOs who've gone through the Bauer Forum. And we create a space for peer coaching, a space where leaders come share what is their mandate, because nobody's going to tell them what they need to do. So they need to create their mandate, develop their mandate by talking to different stakeholders. So they come in with a framing of their mandate. They share what are some of the challenges that they're facing. And we engage in a Socratic method. We've described that in the book, The Journey of Leadership, where people get a chance to ask questions. And then we actually talk about that individual as though they're not in the room. And they step away a little bit and the rest of us talk about them. And that then results in a conversation, in a very, very deep conversation, both on the business side and on the people side. And the way in which we create this psychologically safe space is through a series of techniques that we go through upfront when they come in on a Thursday, they leave on a Saturday morning, where we help them get to know each other, get comfortable, starting initially with the social side. We also spend time, even frankly, when they sign up for the Bauer Forum, now that they know what they're going to go through, they're making that mental kind of signal to themselves. And then the way we set it up, the way we get them to connect with each other, we have a mechanism where different people introduce each other. So we use a series of techniques to set up that psychologically safe environment. And our thesis is that leaders can actually do that. And we've described a lot of this in the book so that people can create their own advisory board, their own peer coaching network to get input and to hold a mirror in front of them, Shiv.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ramesh, for really outlining that whole process of the Bar Institute. That's absolutely fascinating. My second question for you is, the average tenure of a CEO at a S&P 500 company is at its lowest right now. So for many people on this call, many want to aspire to be a CEO in the future, etc. So my question for you is, what does this mean for people aspiring to be a CEO, this short tenure?
I think the reason the tenures have become short is just it's a signal of the world changing so fast. And if there's one constant, it's the rate of change in the world, whether it's geopolitics, technology disruptions, climate change, all the demographics, especially post-COVID with the challenges around remote work. All of this has made leadership much more complex today than ever before. It's a 24 by 7 role. You have to be always on with social media. Anything you comment in one place is going to go all over the world. And so that's what makes it a tough job. And I think what the main thesis of our book is this concept of inside out leadership. Our thesis and what we saw successful leaders do is have a much deeper sense of their own purpose. Who are they? What is their identity? What is their why? What do they want to accomplish in the world? And use that to inspire teams and inspire institutions. Our belief is that this idea of an imperial CEO who knows all the answers is no longer relevant. So that's why chapter 1 of our book is You're Not the Smartest Person in the Room. So how do you have a clear North Star, a vision and a purpose, and yet co-create solutions and work with teams to come up with answers to problems? That's what we see these successful leaders doing. And managing this balance, managing this apparent paradox, it's not easy. I'll give you one example. She's in the book, Rita Roy of MasterCard Foundation. She runs a $40 billion foundation dedicated to Africa. On the one hand, she's able to engage with leaders in Africa, government leaders, social impact leaders, have a very clear vision, have a very clear purpose. And yet in the right environment, in the spaces with her team, with some of her NGO partners, able to be extremely vulnerable and share questions for which there are no easy answers. And that's the balance that many, many leaders find tough, Shiv. And my thesis is that's what has led to this attrition, because people have not been able to manage these apparent paradoxes or have a balanced approach to what we've seen successful leaders do.
Yeah, thanks, Ramesh. In your book, you mention very strongly that CEOs need truth tellers in their organization. So a bunch of questions around this concept of truth tellers is, how do you think the concept of truth teller works in high power distance cultures? Number one. You also mentioned that your wife is the ultimate truth teller to you, and she has told you more truth and to your face compared to, or much more than all your McKinsey colleagues have done so far. So question there is it easier for us to take feedback from our loved ones as opposed to colleagues at work? And what does it take for a CEO or for a CHRO or the management team or the board to build a culture where truth tellers can survive and thrive?
There are actually multiple questions in those. Maybe I'll start with my own personal story. And my wife and I, we went to business school together, and we've been married for 30 years. And she is definitely one of the members of my advisory board. She's not, if I in my advisory board, she's not the chair of my advisory board, but she's definitely one of the members. And so and the same with her as well. She runs a a nonprofit foundation called Problem Solvers Lab. And she very much, I am one of the people who provide input, but she has a set of people who are helping set that up. So I feel loved ones can definitely be incredible truth tellers, but it's at least the way I have solved for it is to have, she has one voice, but not the only voice I listen to. And there are some things that is actually tough for loved ones to communicate. That's why we say, as a doctor or as a therapist, you cannot treat a loved one, but you can definitely share truth and with a great relationship, and especially with a long-term relationship, you can get incredibly valuable input. I think as I switched from the individual to the organization, and in fact, when I joined McKinsey 30 years ago, I got some tough feedback. I was good at solving problems. I was good at connecting with clients and connecting with people, but I was not very organized. The education system in India, I went through all the classic, IIT, IIM, etc., had not taught me how to do a to-do list or how to be organized myself so that I could be what we call at McKinsey end product oriented. And so I got a lot of feedback coaching on that, and I've improved. I've worked with coaches over time, and I've really turned that into an ability. That's why I'm able to serve clients, write a book, be on 5 nonprofit boards. So all of this has needed me to be organized, and McKinsey has supported me in this process. So part of the truth-telling culture is not just giving feedback, but also supporting and providing coaching, and so that truth-telling goes with that support. Those two need to go hand in hand. And one of the media company CEOs who we interviewed in the book, he had a system where he had a group of 15, 20 people at different levels in the organization, that a network that he had set up for himself, who would come and give him the truth all the time so that he could get frontline news from what were the customers saying or what were readers saying about some of the books they were doing, book publishing, about what they were doing, so that he was not caught up in his own ideas, which may or may not be correct. And while he had a leadership team, he really felt it critical that he needed to get frontline input. And that's why he had set up this, people sometimes call it skip level reviews, or, he called it a network of truth tellers that gave him enough input from the front line that allowed him to lead effectively. One last thing I'll say, at McKinsey, we use the term obligation to dissent. And for us, that's actually a very core part of what we do. And we actually went through a whole process whether we needed to evolve that a little bit from obligation to dissent to obligation to engage, because especially with Gen Z, sometimes you find dissent without constructive engagement. But we actually decided to stick with that principle and recommitted to it because we felt it's actually very, very critical for our profession. Clients expect that from us. And I see that in many other industries, the energy industry, if you're on an oil rig, or in the airline industry, if you're a co-pilot, all of these industries, you need that principle. You need some set of values that allows people to dissent. But there's obviously how to dissent is a skill that needs to be taught. So in the first couple of weeks at McKinsey, I used to lead learning and partner learning. I would meet a lot of new hires. The first thing I would teach people is how to exercise that obligation to dissent. That's at least how I've thought about this.
Fantastic. That's great. Charles, has Professor John joined in?
Shiv, Professor John had joined a couple of times, I think, and then dropped out. So I'm guessing he's facing some connectivity issues. In case he's unable to join, we'll probably have to convene a separate session with him, but let's carry on.
Okay, so let me know as and when he joins, please.
Yeah, sure.
Okay? Yeah. So Ramesh, you talk of a more balanced, human-centric approach to developing CEOs and does help them reach their full potential. Can you describe this balanced approach that you guys have, enunciated?
Yeah, our thesis is that leadership starts with leading self, leading teams, leading institutions. And, I already referred a little bit to it, this idea that as a leader, I have answers to all the questions and I tell people what to do, is no longer relevant in the world. So we spend time in the Bauer Forum, but also in our broader work, with leaders, helping leaders think through their own purpose, who they are, why they do, what gives them energy, so that what do they stand for, so that, you come at leadership with a much stronger clarity of that purpose, vision, what you want to accomplish in the world. And use that then to, as I mentioned earlier, co-create answers, solutions with the team, and use that then to drive change in the world. And even Mahatma Gandhi had said once something to the effect of, be the change you want to see in the world. So the way to drive that change is by role modeling that behavior yourself and inspiring the world to see what you're talking about. I'll give one more example. Stefan Bansal, who co-founder of Moderna, and during COVID, really drove the institution to led the institution to develop and manufacture vaccines from a point where they had not done a single vaccine. And there's a story in the book where at one point they began to get confidence that they can develop the technology will start working. The challenge shifted to manufacturing. And this was a context in which they had never manufactured a single dose of a vaccine, a single dose of any mRNA product. They were really a startup that was still early in the development. He sat down with his head of manufacturing and he asked him the question, how can I support you to make 1 billion doses of the vaccine? How can I support you to make 1 billion doses? In that question, one, there was a very clear, ambitious goal, and there was no question on the goal. And the reason Stefan had that 1 billion doses was, if they didn't do 1 billion doses, they were not going to be relevant in the world. There was no point in developing the vaccine, and it wouldn't make any difference to the world. But yet, he had this point about, how can I support you? And Stefan is not a warm and cuddly kind of guy. He is a very task-focused, very mission-driven, very purpose-driven leader. But he was committing to supporting the head of manufacturing with all the ideas, with the resources he needed, willing to roll up his sleeves. And it was not like he had given a target and he was going to walk away and come back 6 months later or 1 year later. He was there in the trenches with the head of manufacturing to support him, recognizing that this is a huge challenge. So it's that balance between being clear of my own purpose, at the same time setting ambitious goals for the team, inspiring the team to pursue them, and yet supporting them and being there with them to solve problems together. That's what we're referring to in this more human-centric, balanced approach, without compromising ambition and tough goals.
Okay. The book also argues that personal resilience is key now for CEOs and leaders, especially CEOs who are taking big swings without a second chance, or as you say, without a second innings in sight. So what is this concept of resilience as a muscle? How do you guys define it, and how can every leader or every manager practice it in a future world?
Yeah, we came at this concept of resilience because of all the changes in the world. And therefore, we see leaders as corporate athletes. Athletes, whether it's the Indian cricket players or the NFL players in the US, they all actually invest a lot in themselves. Tom Brady has multiple people helping him be mindful, be physically fit, be well rested, so that for him to be fully functional with all the stress and all the visibility, he needs to really take care of himself. And we found when these leaders came to the Bauer Forum, many of them actually don't invest enough in self-care. They take care of their clients, their colleagues, their families, and we're not investing enough time in themselves and not investing the kind of support network so that they can have the intellectual, emotional, spiritual energy needed to deal with all the changes in the world. And that's why we feel this individual resilience is quite important, so that as a leader, I can come through tough times. I'll share a bit of personal story. My wife and I, over the last 15, 16 years, we've been through some very tough times. I don't normally share this in a public setting. We've lost 2 kids to cancer. So it's been very, very hard for us. Most marriages don't survive an episode like this. So we've had to really invest in professional help, family, colleagues, clients. In a sense, I see it as the whole universe is supporting us. And the reason we invest so much time in helping other people and doing all the social impact work is it gives us energy. The more I put into it, the more I get out of it, the more we get out of it. It actually keeps us together as a family unit. So that individual resilience, we think, is actually quite important. And that then is a foundation for institutional resilience. In all the research that McKinsey has done in what makes strong organizations that deliver value to shareholders and to employees over a long period of time is when a crisis happens, they come out of the crisis even stronger. They use it as a way to strengthen the basic processes, really question the vision behind what they're trying to do, their own purpose, and do the tough actions that they need to take, and yet come out of this even stronger. I'll give you an example of Cincinnati Children's Hospital. They went through a crisis of their own, and it's all there in the book. Michael Fisher, the CEO, they had a big challenge with quality of outcomes for kids. And when that happens, it can really, be very, very bad for an institution. He used that as a chance to really both strengthen his own leadership team and come out of this to put in place a mechanism where they could have the tough conversations when things don't go well, put in place the systems in the operating room or systems in the treatment protocols, so that now, over the last decade, they are seen as one of the highest performing institutions from a quality of childcare, and really use the crisis and use COVID as a way to strengthen their relationships with communities, strengthen their quality system, and have really, they're a 150-year-old institution. He really asked the question, what is it going to take to be there for the next 100 years? And that's what they've done through this couple of crises that they went through. So this individual resilience, we think, is actually quite foundational to create institutional resilience over time, Shiv.
Okay, that's a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing those personal moments with us. I know it's not easy. Everyone talks of an authentic CEO. Could you describe for us, from your experience, what does authenticity mean at a CEO level?
For me, authenticity and what we've seen is a reflection of their as a leader's own purpose, getting reflected in what they're doing every day, and bringing a set of ideas and yet being very open to input. I'll give you another example. Wendy Cobb, who is the founder of Teach for America, about 15 years ago, she had this idea that education equity is a problem, not just in America, but the whole world. Why not take it to the whole world? She's also there in the book. And initially her thesis was, let's take the learnings, the playbook from Teach for America, and take that to many countries in the world. When she came to India 15 years ago, she met Shaheen Mistry, who's the founder of Teach for India, an entrepreneur who had an idea at a similar point. Shaheen and Wendy spent a lot of time together. And the more Wendy understood, not just India, but many other countries that they were going to, it became clear to her that the entrepreneurs who were setting up these Teach for locations, they had a vision, they had a purpose that they were excited about. Of course, there was a common mission around education equity that was binding them together, but the context was very different in each of these countries. So Wendy realized that control is an illusion. And she had to really let go of many of the core ways in which things had been done with Teach for America and evolved her own leadership style. She calls it more facilitative leadership style, or a more collaborative leadership style, where she is still committed to education equity. She still brings deep expertise to what it takes to create education leaders. She has strong perspectives, on what needs to be done in a classroom to drive excellence. And yet the way in which she supports these leaders is really bringing a set of questions, challenging them to do better, supporting them when they're going through tough times, and being very clear that she is in service of these leaders and these institutions. So today, Teach for All, the network that she has supported, created, is in 62 countries around the world in 15 years. And these entrepreneurs, these organizations are doing amazing work, excellent work. You have a Teach for Lebanon, you have a Teach for Israel, you have a Teach for India, you have a Teach for Brazil, you have a Teach for Nigeria. Each of these, in their own context, is driving education equity, driving excellence in very, very different formats. And Wendy and her team has been doing a fantastic job in being authentic to their purpose, to the quality of excellence, and at the same time being in service of these organizations in different contexts, these leaders who have their own very, very strong vision and purpose, Shiv. That's what I have seen these successful leaders do.
Yeah. So, Charles, I'll ask Ramesh one last question and then hand over to you for you to run the Q&A. So my last question for you, Ramesh, is we are 3.5 weeks away from 2025. In all your conversations with the various CEOs and leaders at every level, what is on the CEO's personal worry list at this point of time?
I think it's the geopolitics, Shiv. The geopolitics are getting more complex. The world is getting more polarized. If you take a stand on an issue and speak up in the wrong way at the wrong time, you can destroy billions of dollars of value. You can erode trust. Trust takes years to build and can erode in minutes or seconds even. And so how do they think about where is it that they take a stand, speak up, that is core to their business and their individual and institutional purpose? And where is it that they just pass? And in baseball, I grew up in India. I enjoyed cricket. When I moved to the US, I started following baseball a bit more. In baseball, you need to learn when to swing and when to just let it go.
Let go.
I think these leaders really, that's what is top of mind for them on with the complex geopolitics and the polarization. How do they deal with issues, and how do they just let go and wait for things to go by, and yet being very clear when there's an issue that is really core to their purpose, not being afraid of taking a stand and speaking out. That's what I find, kind of a big issue that they wrestle with and is quite top of mind, Shiv.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Ramesh. It was wonderful chatting with you. I now hand you over to Charles. Charles, all yours, my friend.
Thank you so much, Shiv. Ramesh, it's been lovely listening to you until now. I'm going to take this time to bring in my co-founder at Founding Fuel, Indrajit Gupta, or IG as he's commonly known. Now, IG has been keeping a very close eye on the questions that have been pouring in both from Zoom, from people who have logged in on our YouTube live stream, and the questions that have come in earlier as well that people have been registering. And he has a knack for distilling complex ideas into sharp, thought-provoking queries, and that is unmatched, I must say. IG, may I ask you to take over and guide us through the questions that have emerged so far from the audience?
Thanks so much, Charles. I'll jump in, but before I do, I did just speak to Professor John Kay. Unfortunately, he's kind of tried joining some 3-4 times while we were testing out our systems, and every time I think there was some connectivity issue. So he's apologized profusely. He was looking forward to address and engage with this audience as well, but he's definitely confirmed that he will do another session. So we may have to reschedule and have him back again on Founding Fuel Live. But it's been terrific to listen to you, Ramesh, and for you to share a deeply personal story from your life, which would perhaps be, I mean, not easy to do this in public, but thank you so much for sharing your family's journey. I wanted to pick up a few questions that came in before, and in the context of what Shiv had asked you a little while ago, there's a variation of that, Ramesh, from Abhijit Fense, who's head in HR at SKF. And he asks, what should leaders let go or stop doing in this new world, as it were? So I'm guessing since we're moving into a new year, it ties in with what we were discussing just a few minutes ago. But do you have additional thoughts for Abhijit?
Yeah, when we think about a leader, whether it's a CEO or a leader in an organization, we often use the term of what we call personal operating model. And what we mean by a personal operating model is 4 dimensions, a clear sense of their priorities and a process by which they set and refine those priorities, a set of a clear definition of their role, and really focusing on what is it that only they can do. A set of mechanisms of managing energy and a set of mechanisms for managing time. So priorities, role, energy, and time. So the 2 things I would advise leaders to stop doing is pick at least a few things that others could do where they are not truly distinctive. Satya Nadella talks about this quite effectively in his book on a CEO really does only 3 things, set the direction of the vision, the purpose, the culture, make choices on the leadership team in line with the direction, key capabilities required, the culture that you want, and take actions when somebody is not really part of a star team. You don't want to build a team of stars, but you want to build a star team. And then driving resource allocation, M&A, big choices around that. Beyond that, you can easily get distracted in so many other things, which are not like really core to the role. So whatever be the context, really being clear on like, what is it that only I can do? And, every day, every week, every month, every quarter, coming up with at least 1 or 2 things where I am not adding distinctive value is what I would advise leaders. And the same thing on the energy. I find managing energy is more important than managing time. And when I reflect on my own purpose, given what I've been through, my own purpose is to bring a smile, sense of possibility, hope, optimism in a world full of demoralization. That's what I stand for. That's what I'm trying to do. So the reason I said yes to even this conversation is I knew it would give me energy. I had heard great things about you. I'd heard great things about Shiv, and I was really looking forward to having this conversation. And I will walk away with more energy from this chat. And I asked myself every Wednesday, I look at the calendar for the next week and say, what are the things that are not going to give me energy next week? As leaders, we cannot control everything that we do. There are tasks that we have to do, but I then try to minimize the time. If it's a calendar entry for 1 hour, can I make it 15 minutes? If it's 15 minutes, can I do it in like 5 minutes where I call somebody and have a chat I need to have? Or can I just delegate it to somebody else who may actually get energy from that process, who it fits with their own purpose. So in the book, we actually have 100 micro practices, which serve as like a starting point for managing energy, managing time, crafting a role, saying no to things, so that I can really then say no to a few things that drain my energy. Those would be the 2 things I would suggest in the
very, very interesting perspective on energy, because one is heard but you're already practicing some of it yourself, which makes it even more interesting. So I quickly move on to 2 questions and I'll bunch them together if it's okay. There's one from Chaitanya GK and the other from Deveshi Chakravarti, where both asking about, obviously, the elephant in the room, AI. In the current age of AI, sustainability and global connectedness, what traits do you think will define successful leaders in the next decade? And what should aspiring leaders prepare themselves? How should, aspiring leaders prepare themselves for the future? And I think Debeshi is asking a variation of the same question. What worked before won't work now. So what are the 3 non-negotiable traits future leaders need to thrive, need to do to thrive in the evolving era? I know it's kind of building on what you've said, but maybe there's some additional thoughts that you might want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. It builds on a couple of themes I've already shared, Indrajit, that I do see AI, I do see climate change, sustainability changing the world in fundamental ways. And therefore, I think we all do need to invest the time in understanding what is changing in the world and, keep learning and reinventing ourselves. So if again, that's one of the key principles. We end the book with that concept of reinvention, renewal. And I'll give you, my own example. As I've published the book, I've learned the need to get my voice out in the world. I've always enjoyed being an advisor, coach, mentor. That's the profession I'm in. The book is actually teaching me how to get my voice in there, and I'm getting a lot more advice from Gen Z colleagues at McKinsey who are giving me so many tips on being in social media, getting my voice in the world, of course, in a thoughtful way, but yet like making it interesting, making it provocative, making it personal. That's a learning that has been a fantastic learning for me to reinvent myself and evolve myself as a leader. And yet, I think there are timeless things that are useful to keep in mind, right? Starting with my why. Simon Sinek has talked about it. Many people have talked about what is my purpose, making that front and center and using that to inspire teams so that like I'm co-creating answers with the team, not coming across as the smartest person in the room, waiting for others to speak before I speak up, asking more questions. Those are all skills I feel are quite relevant. Some of them are quite timeless. And overall, our thesis is that even in an AI world, we published a book called Rewired last year. We feel the role of the human in the loop is not going to go away. And the importance of critical thinking, importance of collaboration, creativity, judgment, ethics, these are all skills that are going to be critical even in a post-AI world. And so as a leader, that's what we advise leaders. Those are the skills that I think will become more and more important. Organizations will need to figure out how do they develop character, how do they develop critical thinking, creativity, judgment. All of those, I think, will be even more important in the future, Indrajit.
Terrific. I wanted to just pick up a quick a strand from what you just spoke about, the whole idea of an intergenerational divide. This is something that is of deep interest to Founding Fuel as well, because that's the nature of the workforce today, right? We are seeing organizations and leaders, particularly the senior leaders, struggle with that. You talked about what you've learned. What were the 2 or 3 things that you learned from your interaction with the Gen Z generation?
The biggest, maybe 2 things I will say. One is to, speak out and really use my voice in the world. I think people from Gen Z want more senior leaders to take a stand and not hold back, whether it's in small group settings, large settings. And I've learned that, and I've been, taken a lot of input and nudges from colleagues. How do I be active on social media? I mentioned that as an example. And yet, of course, doing that with judgment, being aware of risks and where and how I want to speak up. I want to be quite thoughtful about. But that's something that I've definitely learned about from Gen Z colleagues. I think the other dimension I see compared to where I was when I joined the workforce 30 years ago, is the care they bring for making a difference to society and being aware of what's going on in them. And I look at, I sit on the board of Teach for India. Some of the fellows who come in to TFI, I am so inspired by them. They come in much earlier in their career. They want to make a difference to the world around them. They bring citizenship or community orientation that I've learned from. I had the idea, and my wife and I, we got involved with education 20 years ago, but I see these colleagues being even more committed to making a difference around them. One of Shaheen Mistry, who is the founder and CEO of Teach for India, she talks about the notion of student leadership and giving a voice to students. And when I speak with students in the classroom, I speak to fellows, Teach for India fellows, I am so inspired by the difference they want to make to the community and how aware they are. So those are the two things I've learned. Using my voice and contributing even more to the community around me in the gym.
Thank you, Ramesh. I'm going to just push you one more time because since you work with so many leaders across industries, how many of them are really conscious to your mind about tapping in and building bridges with the new generation? The reason why we asked, there's a question from one of our, I'll just read out, from Shama, lawyer. She's a partner at Denton's. She's saying, as a middle-level leader, how do you deal with insecure leadership at the senior level? And this is a reality I've heard many times before.
There's one insecurity.
While you're answering, I will just go off camera for 2 minutes because I'll lose power. Otherwise, I forgot about. Just give me. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah. I think this idea of insecurity, I hear that word a lot. We have consciously chosen not to use that word in the book. I do think a little bit of paranoia. Andy Grove of Intel had said, only the paranoid succeed. So a little bit of anxiety, as long as it's healthy, is actually quite good. So in that sense, if a leader feels a little bit of anxiety about connecting with Gen Z or being on social media, that's actually healthy. That anxiety will serve them well so that they don't say something that is inappropriate or or do things in a way that that don't reflect their own true purpose of themselves or the institution. So a little bit of that anxiety is actually not bad. I think is good. At the same time, back to this creating network of truth tellers that I touched on, my invitation to leaders would be create a small group of Gen Z people who can actually provide feedback. At McKinsey, we have this concept of reverse mentoring. So I have a couple of people who are project managers who are earlier in their tenure, who are actually official mentors for me. So they come back, and in fact, one of them writes a memo to me each year on what I do well and what can I do better as I look at next year. And I find that incredibly valuable because he actually is very pointed and is his role to give me ideas. So creating a formal construct with a small group of people. And then I would encourage small experiments, not to maybe start with a group of 5 or 10 people where you can be more open, try experimenting, saying things or approaching topics that you may not otherwise be comfortable with. And then maybe it will not work well, and you may say something that gets tough feedback, but you set that up as a learning mechanism. And then if that works, you can then expand from that. Maybe start with a LinkedIn account. If that works, you can go to Facebook and then Instagram and then TikTok if you want to experiment even more, and really figure out where you're comfortable. So I often tell leaders, be slightly uncomfortable but not too uncomfortable, so that you're still a little anxious but continuing to stay in the learning zone in the gym.
Terrific. I think Vivek, Ramesh has a question on authenticity. I mean, I think it's in the context of of all the issues around um, a bit of wokeness as well as DEI, which is, I think, posted on the Zoom chat. Is it possible for CEOs to really maintain authenticity in the way that you describe? Are there practical issues?
There are definitely practical issues, right? I think the pendulum often swings, whether it's ESG, DEI, wokeness. Like sitting in the US for the last 20 years, it's been fascinating to watch. And I'm assuming there's a version of this in India as well. So yes, there are practical issues, but I think at least the successful leaders that we've observed, the successful companies, they take a long-term orientation to, what is their purpose? How do they want to show up? And really speak up only on issues that they care about deeply, that are going to be important for them long term. So even on DE&I, I find companies that truly care about inclusion, for whom it's actually a core part of their business, from a employee standpoint, from a customer standpoint. Maybe they don't share the targets as explicitly, or they don't, like, the stand that they take may have changed and they're being a bit more practical, but what they do and the fundamental practices that they're following in the company and what they truly believe in as leaders, they don't change that overnight or every quarter based on like what's happening in the world. So that's what I see these and often these pendulums like swing one way, then may swing the other way. So those are all I actually see as good tests for a leader to truly test their own authenticity and see what they believe in. And also be clear that when they're going to take a stand on something, be prepared for a scenario when the pendulum is going to swing the other way around, and test whether the stand that they're taking is going to stand the test of time, which is the most important test of all, Indrajit.
Right. But you also spoke about some enduring traits or values around leadership, which are important to keep in mind, which are not necessarily linked to, the latest fad or things that have suddenly emerged in the new space. So what I do now is kind of invite back Shiv and Charles. I think Shiv and Charles, if you guys want to kind of come in and
Charles, over to you.
build on,
Yeah, you want to close? We have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
Over
And
to you,
just
Charles.
before you close, I just want to reiterate, for the benefit of people who've joined us a little late, that Professor John Kay will make himself available later this month. He's apologized. I just spoke to him on WhatsApp. He's facing some connectivity issues in Scotland, where he's currently based. He met with a rather serious accident and has been recovering. He was looking forward to this session as much as all of us were. We'll make that happen. And Ramesh, of course, is more than made up single-handedly with Shiv. But we'd love to have you back as well, Ramesh, when John joins. But take it away, Charles.
Yeah, thank you, IG. So it's been fascinating listening to this Q&A, but we just have a few minutes left. But before we do, I have a question for the both of you, since both of you are deeply engaged. We heard a lot of things about Gen Z and how different they are. Ramesh, if you could come in on this, how do you stay tuned in to Gen Z? And we've heard narratives about how they are totally different creatures from us. And then, Shiv, would you like to offer pointers on this one?
I shared a little bit already, right? I come in with a mindset of curiosity and learning. Again, I'll go back to a Mahatma Gandhi quote: live every day like it's your last, and learn every day like you live forever. So I study human behavior, leadership. And so when I'm talking to a colleague who's just come in to the workforce, or even a Teach for India fellow, or even a student in a Teach for India classroom, I did a leadership lesson with Shaheen and with another senior executive on leadership in a middle school classroom a few months ago. So I always come in with that mindset of curiosity. And then there are clear themes I'm learning, like I said, about bringing my voice to the world, or being more aware of the communities around me. So there are areas where I want to learn from Gen Z colleagues. And then the last is structured mechanisms. I talked about the idea of reverse mentoring. I mentioned I get a memo once a year with like, what can I do better based on a set of interviews of younger people that I work with. So all of those then help me stay tuned in, and then I'm experimenting, whether on social media or other mechanisms. And some work, some don't work, and I'm constantly then evolving and staying current. So I'm 53 years old. I've been at McKinsey for 30 years, but I still, enjoy learning and, bringing that curiosity every day, Charles.
Thanks. Thank you, Ramesh. Shiv?
Yeah, so I would say at the outset, I'd say that every generation thinks that the previous generation is no good.
Okay.
And every generation thinks that the next generation is no good.
Okay.
So we are in this peculiar dilemma. It happens all the time. But one thing I see about the current generation, whether you want to call the millennials, Z, whatever it is, two things they are very good at compared to previous generations. One is they're facile with technology, much more than anybody else in the past. Second is they're far more articulate in their own way. Okay, they're short forms, this, that, whatever it is, but they're articulate enough. Okay, working with various generations in my big roles in Nokia, we had reverse mentoring in 2010, and that was the cover story of a business today. And I still remember Cyrus Master, Navneet, all of them standing in that water pond and talking about how they reverse mentor the management team. So we gave a reverse mentor to each member of the management team. Okay, and this was about technology and the app world. In PepsiCo, we did something very interesting, which they continue even till today. In 2014, we started the concept of YCOM, or a youth com. Okay, 65% of the company was millennials. So we said, look, all company events, all cultural events, all annual conferences, customer conferences should be run by these guys. They should, tell us what to do. But the thing was, we didn't nominate the 10 members of the YCOM. The YCOM were elected by the other millennials. So we actually had a formal election in PepsiCo where, 300, 400 people elected them. So there'd be massive campaigning, but the only rule I had was no management team member should ever endorse a candidate, which they follow even today, because then that's wrong. And that worked exceedingly well, because that's how you bring the voice of the young people to speak truth to whoever is in charge.
Right. Great. Thanks for that, Shiv. So, like IG said, Ramesh, thank you so much for sharing your narrative with us. It is hugely, it's deeply touching, and we really appreciate your sharing that with us. Shiv, as always, you have been outstanding. Your homework has been absolutely thorough, and the way you've gone about it, it's so meticulously. The lesson for all of us, and it's been an absolute privilege to listen to the both of you. And like IG said, we'll be back with Professor John K. as well. To our audience who tuned in, you've been wonderful. Your questions, engagement, enthusiasm, that's truly enriched this audience. And here's something to look forward to as well. By noon on Monday, you'll receive the video recording of this Founding Fuel live session, plus a handcrafted summary of the key takeaways from this conversation that will be thoughtfully put together by my soft-spoken and very diligent colleague, Sweta Basrao. Allow me to assure you, she's very stern with us as well, but I must promise you that it will be a great read. And with that, thank you all for joining us. Have a good night and a wonderful weekend.